Howdy guys, and welcome to another Automation Anywhere and BPM technical tutorial. In this edition we're going to carry on our journey into integrating BPM and Automation Anywhere together, and in this edition we're going to look at how we can launch a BPM process from within the auspices of Automation Anywhere. Now, there isn't one answer to this. There's many different opportunities and mechanisms and technologies available to us to launch a BPM process without even considering Automation Anywhere. And in this edition, we're going to look at using events. So BPM can be configured to listen for incoming events that originate outside of BPM. When one of those events arrive, BPM can do a variety of things, and one of those is to launch a process. So here we have a trivial BPM process modeled on the screen. It waits for an event to arrive. When an event arrives, it executes a logging statement which does nothing more than log to the console, which shows that we were launched, and then the process ends. So if this process successfully runs, we will see a message written to the log. Alright, now let's talk about how BPM events are defined. Over here in the Events tab, we create something called an undercover agent. Isn't that an awful name? Absolutely awful. But anyway, we create ourselves an undercover agent. I've got one already created here. And an undercover agent is basically the definition of an incoming or outgoing event. And so we create an undercover agent, we give it a name. I've called it AA Launcher 1, and I've said that the input parameter to it is going to be a string. Now in BPM, when we create an undercover agent, BPM generates for us a UUID, a distinct ID, and this is the ID that we associate with the receipt of this event. So if we send an event with this payload, this event ID payload, it will be as though this AA Launcher 1 event was started. Wow, don't know why we couldn't have used the name AA Launcher 1, but it's apparently a distinct UUID. So going back to our BPM process, we added a start event activity, and in the association of that start event activity, we said we're going to map that to the UCA, the BPM event called AA Launcher 1. So again, just to summarize, we defined an event type, we called it Launcher 1, we created a process, the process is triggered by a start event, and we say that the start event which triggers this process is going to be AA Launcher 1. And then if we look again at the event ID, we see it's this big long UUID. Now this event is within a process, and this process is within a process app, and the name of this process app happens to be AAS1. We'll come back to that shortly. Now let's turn our attention to Automation Anywhere, because there is a REST request. This is the documentation for it. This REST request can be received by BPM, and if the REST request contains an XML message as its payload, the REST request can be used to trigger the arrival of the BPM event. And in the payload, we specify the process acronym, that's AAS1 in our example, and we specify the event name. And the event name is that long UUID which we obtained from the UCA definition. So with those two magic numbers, the process app acronym and the UCA event ID, if we submit a REST request with this payload, that will cause BPM to fire a process. So now we can turn to Automation Anywhere. And here is a solution that I've developed that does just that. So the solution, we start by building an XML message. So I'm going to parse this piece of XML. Think of this like a template. This is the raw structure of the core of the XML message that we're going to send from Automation Anywhere to BPM. It doesn't contain the process app application name, doesn't contain the event ID, and it's got no value for a parameter. Those are going to come from variables that we've defined in our task. We've got an event ID, an event parameter, and a process app. And these have been defined to hold the initial values that we're going to send to BPM. So we start parsing this piece of XML, and once we've parsed that XML, we update a couple of fields in it. We update the event field to contain the event ID, and we update the process app attribute to contain the process app value. And these values, they just come from this sample message in the IBM BPM documentation, and we're doing a fill in the blanks using Automation Anywhere's XML manipulation. Finally, I do another XML manipulation to set the parameter value. We save the modified XML to an environment variable, to a variable called event message. And finally, we execute the REST request pointing at your BPM server, passing in the parameters that are the necessary parameters to the event, to the BPM request, and it just runs. So let's go have a look. The time now locally is 1:51 p.m. Hit the run button, hands off the keyboard. We should see that it runs, boom, and it's done. And if we were to now look in the log of my BPM environment at 1:51, we have a message of hello world, and that came from executing the BPM process. So if I come in and I change my parameter value, let's change that to hello world says Neil, hit the save button, save the task, run the task. It whirs and it clicks for a few seconds as it runs up. It runs, it's completed. We look in the BPM output, it says hello world says Neil. And just one more test just to prove that that's what's really going on. Let me change my BPM process. Let me change the script, and let me add, and this is the AA sent value. So let's add this. So we've now modified my BPM process. Let's go back to Automation Anywhere. Let's run it again. Again, Automation Anywhere runs up. It runs my task here, which builds the XML, sends the REST request. And if we look in the console output, we now see this is the value of the variable hello world says Neil, and this is the AA sent request. Alright, now what has this all shown us? This has shown us a really elegant, very simple, done in 5 steps in Automation Anywhere to send a request to BPM that would cause a BPM process to start. Now, the event that arrived at BPM, of course, triggered a process. But there's nothing to prevent us in BPM from having events elsewhere. For example, we could use an event to interrupt a process, to cancel a process, or to unblock an already existent process. So there are many, many things we can do with external eventing arriving at BPM. And I guess, in my opinion, this is one of the most flexible approaches to automating the start of a BPM process, because it can be used in a variety of other distinct techniques. I hope you found something useful in this video. I look forward to making more in the future, folks. Thanks for now, and bye-bye.